The year I turned 18, I graduated high school. Before heading off to college, I wanted to make some unforgettable memories. That summer, 3 of my closest friends and I decided to go hiking. To prepare, we joined a hiking group and took a bunch of classes to learn the ropes. After getting ready, we picked a mountain perfect for beginners. For someone with experience, it'd be a breeze to hike it alone, no problem. But since we were newbies, the group assigned 2 seasoned hikers to guide us. On the day of the hike, we all met at the trailhead, geared up, and started our climb. The mountain mostly had easy trails, with just a few tricky spots where you had to watch your step. Still, it was a real test of our stamina. We'd been climbing for about 2 hours, and I was bringing up the rear. We hit a steep, muddy uphill stretch that really drained us. I was trudging along, head down, focusing on my footing while following my friends. Then I noticed my shoelace was loose. I crouched down to tie it quickly. But when I stood up, my heart sank. Everyone was gone. My friends, the group, the guides, all vanished. I'd only been down there for a few seconds. How could they disappear so fast? Panic set in. I started jogging forward, desperate to catch up, but that was a dumb move. In my rush, I didn't see the edge, slipped, and tumbled down a slope. I landed in a dense patch of trees and bushes, a spot so hidden it seemed impossible anyone would find me. My body was bruised all over, and worst of all, my left ankle throbbed with this sharp, unbearable pain. I could barely move it, pretty sure it was dislocated. I screamed for help, shouting until my voice gave out, but no one answered. Eventually, I forced myself to calm down. I figured I needed to save my energy. My friends would notice I was missing and come looking for me, right? So I stayed put, waiting for rescue. But days passed, days with no one passing by. I stared at the empty wrappers of my snacks and my bone-dry water bottle. Despair hit hard. It felt like this was it, like I was going to die there. I was so weak I couldn't even feel the pain anymore. I thought about how I'd finally gotten into my dream college, all my hopes for the future slipping away. In my head, I whispered an apology to my parents. My vision started to blur, my consciousness fading. Just as I gave up all hope of surviving, something changed. In the quiet of the mountain, I heard it, the crunch of leaves under someone's feet, coming from the slope above. I mustered every ounce of strength I had left and called out, my voice barely a croak. Then I saw him, a figure leaning over the edge, shining a flashlight down at me. I weakly waved my hand, catching the light. Moments later, ropes dropped beside me. A man rappelled down, landing next to me. He quickly gave me a few sips of water, secured me to his back, and climbed up the slope with me. I was barely conscious, my memory of the rescue hazy, but that's how I remember it. After that, everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital. A nurse told me someone had called an ambulance from a payphone at the trailhead. When the paramedics arrived, they found me passed out alone. I stayed in the hospital for a while, made a full recovery, and moved on with life. As the years went by and I got older, the memory of that day started to fade. Then, just before my 48th birthday 30 years later, I decided to go back to that mountain. I wanted to conquer it, to finish what I'd started. That day, I hiked up, soaking in the beauty of nature. Halfway through, I noticed my shoelace was loose again. I crouched down to tie it, and as I stood up, I heard it, a faint cry for help coming from the slope below. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it down the slope. When I saw the person's face, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I finally understood who had saved me all those years ago. A while back, when I was out of work, I'd spend my days messing around with stocks, and in the afternoons, I'd go hiking to clear my head. There was this low mountain near my place, only about 300 meters high, with a few trails leading up to the top. Most of the paths were fine, but there was one side trail I almost never took. It was a longer route, barely used, and passed by some old graves that gave off a creepy vibe. Plus, I'd heard from other hikers that wild dogs roamed there and could get aggressive, so I steered clear. But one cool, crisp day, I figured I'd shake things up. I parked my scooter nearby, grabbed my water bottle, and started up the usual trail. That day, I felt like lingering on the mountain a bit longer, so when I hit the fork, I decided to take that lonely side path to the summit. The trail was covered in fallen leaves, like nobody had walked it in ages. Worried about those wild dogs, I picked up a sturdy branch to use as a walking stick, and, just in case I needed to fend something off. After about 15 minutes of walking, a light fog started rolling in. It wasn't too thick, so I kept going. Then, through the mist, I saw a figure coming toward me. As he got closer, I made out a guy wearing a blue cap, carrying a blue backpack with 2 distinct yellow patches on it. Just as we were about to pass each other, he leaned in and said in this stern, dead serious tone, "You'd better not keep going." His warning caught me off guard, so I turned around and called out, "What did you say?" But the guy didn't even glance back. He just kept walking down the trail, his face blank as a stone. I watched him disappear into the fog, thinking, man, what a weirdo. But something about him felt familiar, like I'd seen him before. That backpack with those yellow patches, I swore I'd noticed it somewhere, but I couldn't place it. I brushed it off, figuring I was overthinking, and kept hiking. About a minute later, the fog cleared up, and I reached the area with the old graves. Past that, I knew there'd be a spot with wild cherry trees, so I picked up my pace. When I got to the cherry tree area, I froze. Down the slope, there was a person, and they were surrounded by wild dogs. My heart raced. I grabbed some rocks, ready to run over and scare the dogs off to help whoever it was. But as I got closer, my stomach churned. The person wasn't just standing there. They were hanging from a tree, their bodies slowly spinning. The dogs were circling below, gnawing at their feet. I was horrified, completely frozen by the sight. Then the body turned toward me, and I saw the face, half-rotted, unrecognizable. I couldn't hold it together and threw up right there. Once I pulled myself together, I used the rocks and my stick to chase the dogs away, then called the police, my hands shaking. While waiting for them, I looked around and noticed something chilling. Next to the tree on the ground was a blue cap and a blue backpack with 2 yellow patches, just like the one the guy I'd passed was carrying. My mind started spinning with weird thoughts. The police and paramedics showed up soon after. One of the officers asked me a few questions, took my statement, and walked me back down the mountain. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. Something was nagging at me, something terrifying. A few weeks earlier, I met a guy while hiking. As I passed him, he'd stopped me and asked if I knew where the cherry tree area was, saying he'd heard about it. I told him it was down that side trail, but warned him it was deserted and there were wild dogs, so he should be careful. He grinned and said, "Nobody goes there?" That's perfect. Looking back, that response felt off. Why was he so happy about a place being empty? Then it hit me. The guy who asked about the cherry trees looked exactly like the one who warned me in the fog. Same clothes, same blue backpack with yellow patches. The next morning, I called the officer who'd walked me down the mountain. I told him about the guy I'd met weeks ago asking for directions. He went quiet for a second, then said the only person matching my description was the man we found hanging. They'd checked the cameras around the mountain's base, and he'd gone up alone the same day I'd given him directions. The police confirmed he died by suicide. I broke out in a cold sweat. So that guy had been looking for a secluded spot to end his life, which is why he'd said, "That's perfect," when I mentioned the trail was empty. Maybe his spirit didn't want to be found, and that's why he appeared to me, warning me not to go further. When I was 8, my grandparents came to visit us in our small town for a week. There was this low mountain nearby with a little community where my uncle and some distant relatives lived. One day, Grandpa decided to hike up to visit friends and check in on my uncle's family. I begged to go along, excited to see the mountain scenery. So Grandpa agreed, and we set off on foot, treating it like a little adventure. As we climbed, I was blown away by the beauty around us. The mountain was gorgeous during the day. Tall trees, cute wild animals, and insects I'd never seen before. I was thrilled, soaking it all in. After a while, we reached Grandpa's friend's place, visited for a bit, then headed to my uncle's house. We stayed there until around 8 at night. My uncle warned us it was getting late and we should head down soon. He said folks living up there never went out after 10 because weird things happened, strange noises, creepy stuff. He didn't go into details, but I got the hint. Spooky, supernatural business. So Grandpa and I grabbed our stuff, he flicked on his flashlight, and we started down a mountain, still in a pretty good mood. We'd been walking for a bit when we hit this super dark stretch where the moonlight was blocked by huge trees. The area felt eerie, and there was this old abandoned house nearby, just sitting there like something out of a ghost story. As we passed it, I heard some odd noises, but Grandpa didn't seem to notice, so I tried to ignore them and kept walking. But things got weirder fast. The usual night sounds, crickets, wind rustling the leaves, stopped. Everything went dead quiet. I started feeling uneasy. Grandpa must have sensed it too, because he grabbed my hand and said, "Stay close." I glanced at my watch. It was 9:20. I told Grandpa I was getting scared, and he reassured me, "We're almost home, don't worry." But then, right as we were passing that creepy old house about 10 meters ahead, we saw something strange. There was this big tree with a life-size doll tied to it. The doll had a piece of paper stuck to its face, and the paper had a drawing of a boy's face. I thought it was super weird. Grandpa saw it too and said, "A creepy doll tied to a tree? That's interesting." Right after he spoke, we noticed something else. A woman standing nearby, her back to us. I whispered to Grandpa, asking why someone will be wandering around in this dark mountain. He said, "Maybe she's lost." He started walking toward her, pulling me along. When we were about 5 meters away, the woman suddenly took off, walking fast. Grandpa called out, "You okay?" "Lost." She didn't answer, just kept moving. Grandpa tried again, louder. "Miss, do you need help?" The second he said that, she stopped dead in her tracks. The air felt heavy, like something was seriously off. Then, out of nowhere, she spun around and charged straight at us. Grandpa and I froze for a split second, freaked out by her sudden move. Sensing danger, Grandpa scooped me up in his arms and bolted down the mountain path. Since he was carrying me, I was facing backward, right toward her. I saw her chasing us, and her appearance was terrifying. Her neck looked broken, her head flopping unnaturally with every step, like it was barely attached. I was so scared I squeezed my eyes shut and buried my face in Grandpa's shoulder, too terrified to look back. After a while, Grandpa panted, "We're almost at the road, don't be scared." I slowly opened my eyes and instantly regretted it. Her face was right there, inches from mine, her eyes wide and glaring into me. She let out this blood-curdling scream, "I'm gonna kill you." I burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. Grandpa must have heard her too, because he sped up, running even faster. We finally hit the main road, bursting out of the trail. I looked back, and the woman was standing at the trail's entrance, just staring at us. After a moment, she turned and ran back up the mountain, vanishing into the darkness. By the time Grandpa carried me into town, I checked my watch. It was 10:30. I told him I was so glad we made it out safe, but we couldn't stop wondering about that woman. What was she? The next day, while walking around town, Grandpa brought up the encounter with a neighbor. The neighbor cut him off, asking, "You mean near that old abandoned house on the mountain?" When Grandpa nodded, the neighbor called over his mom, an elderly woman who told us the story. A long time ago, a woman lived up there who loved her kid more than anything. One day, her child went missing. Back then, kids getting kidnapped wasn't uncommon. She came to town begging for help, and the police and townsfolk searched for months, but they never found the kid. Everyone gave up, but she refused. She kept searching the mountain and town alone. People tried to convince her to move on, but she'd get into fights with them, refusing to let go. Over time, her relationships with the townsfolk soured, and some even started spreading rumors that she'd killed her own kid. The rumors made things worse, and she got into constant conflicts with people. Eventually, the town turned against her, and she grew to hate them too. One day, she stormed into town, threatening everyone, saying she'd make them all feel her pain. Then, filled with resentment, she went up the mountain and hanged herself on that tree. The neighbor's mom said we weren't the only ones who'd seen her. Since her death, locals had spotted her on the mountain multiple times. The doll with the boy's face was put there by the townsfolk, hoping to calm her spirit, but it didn't seem to work. Her anger and grief still lingered. Grandpa and I didn't know what to say. I was scared, but Grandpa felt heartbroken for her. That afternoon, he took me to a flower shop and we bought some flowers. We went back to that tree and laid them down for her, hoping she'd find peace someday. That was the only time I ever saw that woman on the mountain. As I grew up, I went back to that trail many times to visit friends or my uncle, but I never saw her again. Still, every time I passed that abandoned house and saw that tattered, eerie doll hanging in the distance, her terrifying face flashed in my mind, and I'd feel a shiver run through me. One year, I decided to go hiking solo, young and fearless, not really thinking about the risks. I just wanted to soak in the mountain air and enjoy the views. I got to the base of the mountain around 3 in the afternoon, checked the trail map, and saw there was a waterfall up ahead. I figured I could make it there in about an hour, snap a few pics, and head back down. It seemed like an easy spot, like a walk in the park, so I set off with light gear, feeling pretty carefree. After about 5 minutes of walking, I noticed the trail was deserted, not a soul around. Then I spotted a bulletin board by some trees with a sign warning about bear sightings. Next to it were a ton of missing person flyers plastered all over the board. I skimmed through them, and it hit me how many people had vanished on this mountain. It was kind of creepy, honestly. I thought to myself, no way, this little mountain has that many missing people. I got a bit spooked but brushed it off, thinking I was young, strong, and not that unlucky. So I kept going. The trail was alive with nature, bird calls, buzzing insects, fresh air. It was so nice that I forgot about the creepy flyers and just felt glad to be there. Then I heard the sound of running water and got excited, thinking the waterfall was close. I glanced toward the sound and saw a faint dirt path through some tall grass, with a trail marker pointing that way. Without a second thought, I headed down it. But the path got narrower and steeper the further I went. The water sound was still clear, so I didn't think much of it and kept pushing forward. When I stopped to catch my breath, I realized something was off. The birds and bugs had gone quiet, and the sound of the water was gone too. It was just me, my breathing, and my heartbeat in this eerie silence. I hadn't seen a trail marker in a while. I pulled out my phone to check my location, but there was no signal. I didn't have a compass or anything to navigate with either. I stepped into a clearing to get a better look around, and the peaks around me felt way too close, like I'd wandered deep into some wild, untouched part of the mountain. A sinking feeling hit me. Where the heck am I? I realized I was lost. My watch said it was almost 5, and I'd been hiking way longer than I thought. With dusk creeping in, panic started to set in. I decided to turn back and get down the mountain fast. But the paths I took were steep and narrow, and I kept hitting forks in the trail I didn't remember passing. Everything looked the same, trees, rocks, endless ups and downs. I couldn't tell if I was climbing higher or heading down. That fear of not knowing if I was going up or down made my heart race, and sweat soaked through my clothes. I stopped to calm myself down, trying to think straight. That's when I noticed something caught in the bushes, a tattered piece of paper. I picked it up, and my stomach dropped. It was one of those missing person flyers dated 2 months ago, with a photo of a young guy smiling brightly. Sweat poured down my face as I thought, no way, am I going to end up like him? I was freaking out, on the verge of losing it. I shoved the flyer in my pocket and kept moving, desperate to find my way. A few steps later, I saw a figure up ahead waving at me. My heart leapt. I'm saved. I scrambled toward them, but when I got closer, I realized it was just a tree branch swaying in the wind. That freaked me out even more. My mind started racing, wondering if some ghost or spirit was messing with me, luring me deeper into the mountain. I wandered aimlessly, getting more lost by the minute. At one point, I was so desperate I looked at a steep slope and thought, maybe if I slide down there, I'll get to the bottom. Thank God I didn't try it. It was a fleeting, crazy idea. Exhausted but refusing to give up, I told myself, keep going. Don't just sit here and die. Then something strange happened. As it got darker, the path in front of me seemed brighter somehow. Every time I hit a fork, one trail looked clearer, almost glowing in my eyes. I didn't know if it was some supernatural force guiding me or just my imagination, but my gut told me to follow the bright paths. So I did. Eventually, I spotted a ribbon tied to a tree, a trail marker someone had left. Hope surged through me. It meant I was on a path people used. I picked up my pace, practically running, until I saw the glow of a vending machine's lights in the distance. That light was like a beacon of civilization. I'd made it out. I caught the last bus home, collapsing into a seat, my hand brushing the flyer in my pocket. I pulled it out and stared at the guy's smiling face, thinking how lonely and helpless he must have felt. It hit me hard. Nature doesn't mess around. It's beautiful, but it can be brutal. Back when I was working a job that had me out in the field, my senior colleague and I got sent to this mountain to scout some addresses and check out spots for building wind turbines. We drove up to the base of the mountain, pulled into a convenience store parking lot, and grabbed a few things. After chatting with a clerk and explaining why we were there, they let us leave our car in the lot. As we were about to head out on foot, this middle-aged guy leaning against his car, smoking a cigarette, overheard us talking to the clerk. He walked over and said, "You guys heading up the mountain? Be careful, don't go wandering off. There's something up there scarier than a bear. A ghost, I'm telling you." My colleague and I just looked at each other, confused, and asked, "What kind of ghost?" The guy shrugged and said, "Oh, just something way creepier than a bear. Watch yourselves up there." Then he climbed back into his car to chill. I brushed it off, thinking, no way, we're here to do our job, not chase ghost stories. But his warning left this weird vibe hanging over us. My colleague looked a bit spooked, his face all nervous, so I tried to lighten the mood, saying, "Come on, let's not overthink it. Let's go." We started up the trail, surveying the terrain as we went. Things were fine until we hit a steeper part of the path. Out of nowhere, my colleague stopped and said, "Wait, what's that?" I followed his gaze to a cluster of trees on a slope nearby. There was something that looked like a burlap sack stuck in the bushes. He said, "I'm going to check it out. Stay here." I opened my mouth to tell him to leave it alone, but he was already heading over, picking his way through the undergrowth. I watched as he grabbed the sack and opened it. His face twisted into this weird, unsettled look, like he'd seen something he wished he hadn't. He quickly tossed the sack aside and jogged back to me. I asked, "You good? What was in there?" He shook his head and said, "Nothing, just some gross stuff. Let's finish up and get out of here." His voice was shaky, and I could tell he was rattled, but we didn't waste time. We hustled through the rest of our survey and started heading down. On the way back, we passed the spot where the sack had been, but it was gone. We both noticed, exchanged a quick look, but didn't stop to investigate. It was too strange, and we just wanted to get off that mountain. As we walked, my colleague started griping. That guy at the store might have been onto something. "This place feels off." I nodded, saying, "Yeah, it's got a weird vibe." Then, out of the blue, he asked, "You think there's really a ghost up here like that guy said?" I chuckled, trying to keep it light, and said, "Look at this place. Kinda spooky, right? Wouldn't be shocked if there was a ghost or two." Right after I said that, my colleague froze. He pointed to a dense, dark patch of woods and whispered, "You hear that? Something's over there." I flicked on my flashlight and aimed it into the trees. It was hard to see, but there was definitely a shadow moving in there, something big. Before I could get a better look, my colleague yelled, "It's here. Run." We both took off, sprinting down the trail like our lives depended on it. We made it back to the convenience store parking lot, panting and shaken. My colleague was still freaking out, saying that thing was terrifying. The guy from earlier was still there, sitting in his car. He got out when he saw us and asked, "What did you see up there?" My colleague blurted out, "It was real. I saw this ghost, face covered in blood, barely any hair, holding something weird in her hand." The guy's eyes lit up, and he said, "A ghost with sparse hair, huh?" I was curious and asked, "Why do you want to know?" He grinned and said, "I came here because I heard someone saw a ghost on this mountain a few days ago. I was going to go up later and live stream it." He grabbed some gear from his car, ignored our attempts to talk him out of it, and headed up the trail alone. My colleague and I just drove back to the office, glad to be done with it. 2 days later, I was flipping through the newspaper and saw a headline that made my blood run cold. Police had found 2 bodies on a mountain in the suburbs. One of them was the live streamer we'd met. Both victims had their heads shaved clean. The killer was a woman with mental health issues who confessed she shaved her victims' heads because she believed it would stop her own hair from falling out. I tracked down my colleague in the office smoking area and asked him what he'd seen in that sack. He sighed, took a drag, and said it was just a bunch of hair and a knife with some blood on it. Probably someone killed a dog or something and stuffed the fur and knife in there. He walked off after that, but his words sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that what he'd seen wasn't animal hair at all. During the same period, my mom's sister and I were all living in a trailer on my great-uncle Wilbur's property, a large cattle ranch. We were staying there while my dad was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. On this property, in the mid-'80s, Uncle Wilbur had built a 2-story building. Everybody called it the Tower. Windows faced each direction on the top floor. The largest one faced towards Highway 99. Wilbur believed that you could learn much from observing the 99. In the evening, he would often go up to the tower, watch TV, and keep watch over the cattle. In the lower portion of the tower is where my family kept our clothes and food. One night, Mom had instructed my sister and I to go to the bottom of the tower to pick out our breakfast for the next morning. Tricia was in the middle of doing something, so I offered to grab breakfast for her. I entered the bottom floor of the tower, chose a handful of Pop-Tarts, and above me I could hear the TV, so I assumed Uncle Wilbur was up in the tower. I stepped out of the bottom half and looked up towards the large window to see if Wilbur was there. The TV was on, but Wilbur wasn't in the tower. Instead, there was a family, a mother, father, little girl, and boy. I thought that it was strange they were up there, as Wilbur hardly ever had visitors. Another strange thing was that they weren't watching TV. Instead, they were sitting on the couch and staring out the window towards Highway 99. They didn't move. They were all sitting with perfect posture and hands settled on their laps. Even though I thought it was unusual, I just returned to the trailer and didn't say anything to my mom about it. The next day, I asked Uncle Wilbur who his guests were, and he looked at me with a confused look on his face. He hadn't had any guests last night, and nobody by that description. Who were those people? A few months after that, I had gone down to the bottom of the tower again to grab my breakfast for the next morning. I went in, grabbed some oatmeal, and as I was closing the door behind me, I looked up to the landing that leads to the door on the top floor. Looking over the landing was a woman dressed in a white, flowing dress. She herself was as white as the dress. The woman's hair and dress blew in a non-existent wind. She looked down at me. She smiled, did a slow, long, graceful wave, and despite this friendly gesture, I was terrified. She reminded me of the depiction of banshees that I had seen in movies. I ran back to the trailer and told my mom about what I had seen. She exited the trailer and took the stairs up to the top of the tower. She opened the tower door, and no one was there. We knew the lady couldn't have gotten down the stairs because the windows of the trailer faced directly towards the stairway, and we didn't see anyone come down. Most of the friends of the family know that the tower is haunted. I believe that it sits on some kind of vortex. Though my family no longer lives on the property, I still see spirits from time to time. I call them my visitors. I don't try and communicate with them, nor they me. They just appear, and as quickly as they come, they are gone. When my sister was quite young, our grandmother bought her a porcelain doll. The doll wasn't anything special. It wasn't an antique or anything like that. It was just one that you would buy at a novelty shop. It was on a stand and couldn't be moved without possibly breaking it. She had this doll for a few years before my parents divorced. After the divorce, we moved in with my mother in a poor neighborhood in Alton, Illinois. The house felt strange. It also had a strange smell. My sister put the doll in one of the built-in cabinets in the wall, and that's where she stayed for the first few days. At first, we started to notice small changes about where she was or how she was positioned differently than she was before. She would be on the shelf facing the living room most of the time. Then, when you left the room and came back, she would be rotated a different way. Okay, we thought Mom's probably messing with us. We largely ignored it, but it kept happening. After a few more months, the doll started ending up in different places in the house. She would be on the cabinet, and when you came back from another room, she would be on the dining room table. Or she would be on one of the side tables in the living room by the couch, or on the floor facing the television. We had made a lot of new friends in the neighborhood, and when they came over, I would show them what the doll would do. Without a hitch, I would put her somewhere, we would leave the room for a few minutes, and in return, she would now be in a different spot. Now, I'll go back to saying that we thought my mom was messing with us at first, but mom was at work a lot of those days, and we skipped school plenty of times to stay home, so wasn't mom doing it. One day, we decided to mess with the Ouija board I had in my closet. I don't remember if we bought it or it was just there. The messages coming back from the questions we asked identified a spirit called Candy Zimmerman. She didn't say much, but I remember being able to connect with her myself by the board. She said she had a crush on me. One day I skipped school again, but my sister went. I always walked with my buddy down to the bus stop and hung out with him before heading back home, and I watched my sister get on the bus. My mom worked early, so she wasn't there that day. Then I went back to the house and locked up. Since I was still tired, I opted to go back to bed. The next thing that happened, I will never forget. I heard a knock at my bedroom door. It startled me awake, but I ignored it and laid my head back down. After a few minutes, there was another knock, this one much louder, and in a rhythm I still also remember to this day, a shave and a haircut rhythm, but different. This time, I was freaked out and laid there with my eyes open for I don't know how long. The door to my bedroom was heavy, and it always stuck in warmer weather, which it was. The next thing that happened was the door popped open, just enough for me to see out into the hallway, but not enough for me to see over the edge of my bed. I sat up in bed and looked down on the floor, and there, standing at the entrance to my room, was that doll on its stand, looking at me. Before the fear set in, I was actually pissed off. Did my sister come back? Was she messing with me? I got up, took the doll by the hair, and carried her out into the living room. No one was there. I checked the front door, and it was locked. I barged into my sister's room, and no one was there. I barged into my mom's room. No one was home. At this point, I was freaking out. I took the doll to my sister's room and threw her in the closet. I buried her in a stack of bags full of old clothes and boxes of junk and shut the door. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the front porch waiting for mom to come home. It never happened again, and I made sure to have a friend, a local Wiccan, find the Ouija board, which she kept. We moved out of the house a year later, and after a few more paranormal incidences. As for the doll, after we moved back in with my father, she was in my bedroom closet for about 5 years. One day, we cleaned it out and threw her away. Was the doll haunted? I don't know. It could have just been that house and whatever was moving things around. Currently, my boys are 8 and 6. At the time, they were 4 and 2. We had been living in a place for about 5 to 6 months, and my oldest, who isn't firing on all cylinders to be honest, kept walking to the corner, looking up and talking. He was still doing a lot of babbling until he was almost 6. And then after a few times, he walked over, grabbed his younger brother by the hand, walked into the corner, and he also looked up, started talking, and they were both smiling and giggling like an adult was interacting with him. After my youngest had had his turn, I asked, "What in the world are you two doing?" thinking it was some kind of game. My oldest giggled and said, "I'm talking to Grandpa." I was confused. "Honey, your grandpa lives in Nebraska. He's very far away." My child looks at me and replies, "No, Mommy, it's your grandpa." As I said, my oldest was still doing a lot of babbling, so for him to suddenly speak so clearly and in a complete, coherent thought was very unnerving. I look at the corner. Both my boys are talking and showing toys up to the corner. I watched for a few minutes. This all happened over a grand total of about half an hour. "Babies, come watch your movie so Mom can finish dinner." Because little ones have zero logic, the younger one waddles over and sits down. The eldest picks up the toys that had accumulated in the corner, puts them away, and sits next to his brother. I start dinner, and I keep looking at the corner. Shot in the dark, I said, "Thanks, Grandpa." The door in the corner fell open like someone walked through it. and there was a heightened feeling in the room afterwards. That night, I had a dream of my childhood home. On the path back to the woods, there was a small building, granite like a mausoleum, but it was little more than an awning, one wall that held the door, for pillars, and a bench swing. I walked to it, lit some incense, and sat on the swing and started rocking, staring at the ground. Then, there they were, those old, ratty sneakers. My grandpa was sitting next to me with that smile, sitting on the swing. I just started talking, mostly about the boys. I told him I missed him so much that I named my oldest after him. He just sat and listened with that smile on his face. After a while, we both stood up, and I hugged him and told him I hadn't told him everything yet. Then my name was called from somewhere. I looked around, didn't see anyone, but I looked back and he was gone. I yanked the door open, and it went into this vertical shaft, endless in both directions, completely lined with doors. I woke up crying, amidst a panic attack. My grandfather died in about '05. My grandmother in '08. My son was born in 2010, just 1 week shy of my grandfather's birthday, which happened to be the day the doctor scheduled me to originally be induced. When I was growing up in the 60s on Long Island, I adore my Aunt Elizabeth. She was my dad's baby sister, 12 years younger than him and 17 years older than me. She was a flight attendant for a major carrier and lived in an apartment in the city. She was a classic Italian beauty, petite, with beautiful olive skin, green eyes, and jet black hair. She doted on me, and I loved the pictures and gifts that she'd bring for me from other parts of the country, and sometimes even Europe. When I got older, my parents would let me go visit her apartment, where she and her equally gorgeous and glamorous friends would smoke cigarettes, drink cocktails, and play records and talk about glamorous and adult things together. And I would feel sophisticated and cool merely by being in the room. One day, when she was 30, she called in sick to work, thinking she had the flu. It turned out to be meningitis, and she was dead within 2 days. What followed were the saddest events of my childhood. One of the 3 times I saw my father cry, big racking sobs, was as he was dressing for the wake. I remember Aunt Elizabeth laid out at the wake, wearing her flight attendant uniform, still beautiful. I remember how soft and lovely the cream-colored satin lining her casket felt. So many people came to her funeral. The people just spilled out onto the sidewalk next to a closed suburban Catholic church. Sunday dinners with my grandparents and aunts and uncles never felt the same. Ironically, this niece of a flight attendant from the golden age of air has always been terrified of air travel. I used to travel quite frequently for work, and on some long-haul flights, I would be unable to cope without the help of a whole bottle of red wine and Ambien. A few months ago, I decided I wanted to drop that. It's not exactly healthy. So on my first flight across the country in a while, I took 10 milligrams of melatonin, sat in my seat anxiously, and tried to fall asleep. Eventually, I did. And what followed were terrifying dreams. Of course, it would take place on the same flight, and of course the cabin pressure would drop, and of course the plane would be plummeting, and I was about to die crashing into a cornfield. As everyone panicked and screamed, I saw a flight attendant walking down the aisle to my seat, and it was my Aunt Elizabeth. She was walking calmly and intently with a little sly smile on her face, as if I were an old friend of hers who she hadn't seen in a long time. She was wearing the same flight attendant uniform she was buried in, but her legs and feet were bare. She came, looked at me, took my left hand in hers, and said, "It'll be okay, honey. It really will. Things can look bad, and sometimes it gets a little turbulent, but the pilot will right it." And then she said, "How are you?" I sputtered out the first thing that came to mind if asked. "What have you done with your life since age 13? I think I mentioned where I went to school and something about my first job, something about cell phones and how much she would have loved them. I said my dad had passed, but my mom and sister were doing fine. I talked about how ridiculous rents were in the city and about the changes that had happened to our hometown. As I was babbling, I noticed the plane returning to normal, the pressure coming back, people calming down. And the dream ended shortly before everything returned to normality, with Aunt Elizabeth's hand on my shoulder. I woke up 30 minutes before landing. I was so stunned by this dream. I hadn't really thought about Aunt Elizabeth or about her in detail for years. I had a few minutes, so I called my mother and told her what happened. I mentioned that I thought it was strange that in the dream, she was barefoot while working on the plane. And my mother paused and said, Elizabeth was buried barefoot. Apparently, it's custom in the little corner of Sicily that my father's family comes from for women to be buried barefoot when laid to rest, and they adhered to it when burying Aunt Elizabeth and my grandmother many years later. I would not have known, as the lower lid of her casket was closed during the wake. Now, I'm not even religious, but that made me truly believe that my Aunt Elizabeth came to visit me and comfort me during a time of stress and fear, or something like her, a piece of her. It was wonderful and moving to realize this, like a warm blanket around me. I suddenly recalled memories of my aunt that I didn't even know I had. There I was, in tears in an airport bathroom. I've been through a lot in my life, some moves, unemployment, 2 divorces, losing a house and getting one back, friends and family dying. But for a few moments in a dream, I got to see someone who I loved and who loved me when I was a little girl, excited for the big world ahead of her. I love you, Aunt Elizabeth. Visit again anytime. I've always had some kind of affinity with the paranormal. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't stop writing extremely dark, creepy poetry. I've always been a loner, a one best friend kind of person, if any. Anyway, on to the story. My parents divorced when I was young, so I became depressed and spent a lot of time alone. We moved in with my grandpa and grandma, and they gave us a little house near them. It was so close that we didn't have to walk 5 meters to reach the other door. My mom always spent time there with them, but I preferred to be alone in our new little house. One time, I was sleeping in the dark there. I dreamed that there was a guy with a black face sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at me. I awoke terrified, with that dreadful feeling that there was someone there with me. I snapped out of my daze, turned on the lights, and ran to my grandpa's house. I sat beside my grandmother and said, "That house can be so creepy." She said, "Of course." 2 guys died there from gas while they were renting the place. We found them a week later. She said it like it was a casual thing to tell, and it was also a slap in the face. That was only a warm-up, though. As I got older, my mom remarried, and my grandpa moved to another house of his 150 meters from the previous one. I was left to rot in the old one, living alone for an entire year and a half in my grandpa's old house, which was big, old, and creepy. Even though their new house wasn't too far from me, I still saw stuff there. Shadow people. I remember avoiding most areas in the house. My living consisted of staying in the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The reason was, I always got that eerie feeling of being watched all the time. I was a student finishing my graduation project, so I didn't leave the house that much except for buying my groceries. There were 2 long hallways in my house. The first led to the bathroom, and the second led to my previous grandparents' room. It was a big room, and it was always locked as they kept their stuff in there. So when you stood in the hallway, you couldn't see the door at the end of it. It was so dark, like an endless hallway of darkness. I always avoided that area. You'd somehow start to feel when something is wrong in these situations. I would always hear banging on the door very late at night, at 2 o'clock or 3 a.m. I would brush it off and play courageous since I had no choice. I had to stay in that house or else I had literally nowhere to live. I was always locking the door to the living room, turning the TV on, and trying to fall asleep. Every night, the door didn't lock all that well, and I'd use a chair as an added measure. One night, I wasn't feeling so good and woke up burning with a fever, almost hallucinating, when I heard the chair move. That's when I saw them. A small, dark, shadowy figure sneaking a peek at me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I got up, switched the light on, and looked. The chair had moved out of its place to let the door slightly open. I started crying. I called my parents, but none of them answered. To be fair, it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. I prayed and tried calming down, convincing myself that I was imagining it. 2 months later, I was watching a video about the jinn on YouTube with loudspeakers. For those of you who don't know, jinn are creatures in the Islamic religion, equivalent to demons. The video was called 30 Facts You Didn't Know About Jinns. The last one stated that jinns were living with us and one of them could probably be watching you right now. I giggled and said, "I'm not scared, but I knew I would regret that later." That same night, I put some Quran readings on since it was supposed to keep the shadow people and jinns away, as per my religion. And I kid you not, at 2 a.m. I woke up to 3 shadow people dancing. One of them was at my feet, another at my head, and the third standing over my face. They were all making a strange noise, almost like static. It was so annoying. I screamed, telling them to leave me alone, and they left, and all was calm. Soon after, I began suffering from insomnia. I couldn't sleep at night anymore. I would spend the night studying, finishing my project, cooking, watching TV, playing video games, and drifting off at around 6 a.m. when daylight began peaking. Once, I went to sleep and began dreaming. It was so realistic, it didn't even feel like a dream, and I started hearing some kind of whispers. It wasn't gentle whispering. It was violent, like a chorus from hell. The closest description would be the soundtrack from Dante's Inferno. Quiet but loud and evil and aggressive. I would hear it in my ears, always at the same time, but it was always different. I was still dreaming. I stood up to find the source of the sound, and it was at the creepy room at the end of the hallway, which probably became haunted because it wasn't open for so long. I got closer, and there was a man emerging from the darkness. He was bald, short, and had muscular arms. I could even see his veins. He looked right through my soul while he came my way, and I started reciting a prayer. At the same time, I heard my cousin screaming at the stairs of the house on my left, telling me to flee. The door was opposite to my left, so I started moving, and it was a struggle, like something was pulling me from the other way. I made it through the open door and got out gasping for air. I thought this thing was chasing me. That was in my house, and I didn't want to go back. That's when I woke up to the whispering in my ear once more. After a while, my grandparents came to stay for a bit. My grandma would always sleep with the light on at night. I woke up feeling strange, and I kid you not, there was a giant little girl holding something in her left arm. She had the wildest eyes I've ever seen, and she was grinning at me. She was staring right through me and holding a little dwarf kind of guy. He had a tail and grayish skin and was staring at my grandma. I didn't know what to do, so I just tried to go back to sleep and ignored them. On another occasion, I was sleeping and actually conversing with someone or something. I thought I was dreaming, but when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see them. I was still arguing with them. You should let us in. You're done for anyways. Nobody wants you, your parents left. We're the only ones that will help you now. I was afraid of them. I didn't trust them. What were they saying? They were pressuring me. I was feeling lost, desperate, and alone. I opened my eyes and was crying and a mess. One other night, I dreamed that I was in a very big bedroom in a castle, and it was very fancy. The bedroom was very well decorated, and there was an old woman who looked like a cliché which attending a funeral. She was asking me to let her in. She was very angry, and after a while of me making fun of her, she left. And then another one came. This one took her place and was deaf and mute. It was a very strange dream. After that, my grandma started sleeping in her old bedroom and accused me of running around her bed, throwing stuff at her in the middle of the night, pulling the covers off and the like. I didn't know what she was talking about, but she once woke up screaming, and we found half of her stuff burned beside her. Candles, no lighters, no fire source. She left that same night. Fast forward a while, I grew up, graduated, started working, and got a job out of the country. I left my current work in the Middle East, and I stay alone in a room in a local housing. And I wake up at 5 a.m. to find white fog in my face. I was covered in it. I stayed there for a while, then it turned completely black and vanished. I have no idea what it was. In 1996, when my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, she decided that she wanted to play the Ouija board with her sister. My grandmother had died about 3 months beforehand, and they wanted to see if they could contact her. My mom and aunt say that they had talked to what they thought was their mother, who tragically died in that house 3 months prior. They spoke for about 30 minutes until the planchette made a sharp movement, and the air went ice cold. The planchette was moving very fast on the board as it kept repeating, "Mine, mine, mine." This really scared my mom, so they stopped the session. A few weeks later, my mom went into labor. At the time, this scared my mom because I was a month and a few weeks early. When I was born, I was so small that I had to stay in the hospital for 2 more weeks. All was well when my mom and I left. Fast forward to when I was 4, I started getting horrible night terrors of me sitting on the top of the stairs of my house. In the dream, you could tell that it was daytime, but it was still dark. My feet were stuck to the floor like it was quicksand, and I would scream and scream for what felt like hours. And at the end of the dream, I would always be able to see something crawling up me slowly. It was a very skinny, long-limbed black creature with extremely long fingers and darker fingernails that were even longer. His eyes were a big, burning red. I would get this dream so often. Now, when this creature would start to appear, I would be able to wake myself up. These dreams were quite an often occurrence, almost every night. I told my mom about it, and she told me that I shouldn't stay up late and scare myself with stories. My mom's attitude definitely started to change when my little sister started saying creepy things. At this time, my sister was 2.5 years old and very smart. One night, my sister and I were in my room getting tucked in at the end of the night, and every night my sister and mom played a little game before bed. My mom would tell my sister to spell a word, and my sister would spell it, and she would get a prize. As my mom said goodnight to us, my sister says, "Mommy, can you spell black man better run?" She said this in the most sing-song horror movie kind of way. That night, I woke up to something very odd. An old lady at the end of my bed. Honestly, she looked so real I thought a real old lady was in my room. I screamed, turned on the light, and she wasn't there. Totally creeped out, and I remember keeping the light on as I couldn't sleep in the dark anymore. It was too paralyzing. All of a sudden, I wake up in the darkness again. I didn't even remember closing my eyes to sleep, and there was that old woman at the edge of the bed. This time, I knew she wasn't human. She had blue skin, rotting teeth, her eyes were an unnatural blue, and she was just staring at me, smiling. And she began to laugh. It started with a small giggle, and then she started cackling. She laughed so hard that she threw her head back, acting like a mental patient. I was in such shock I couldn't even cry. My mouth was agape, and after a while, she was laughing so much her mouth was getting larger. It unhinged like that of a snake. And then suddenly, mid-laugh, she stops, snaps her head back, and in a very fast and low man's voice says, "If you're scared, cover your head, little piggy, because I'm not going to stop." I did that right away. I covered my face in my blankets, and right away, she began laughing again. I lay there for what felt like hours under my blankets, scared to death. Finally, I awoke. Daylight. Now, after this happened, I told my mom, and she called my grandpa, who was a pastor. He came over, blessed the house, and everything was okay for the most part. One thing happened after a while when I was a teenager. I moved downstairs and got my own bedroom, and my sister stayed upstairs. Every night, without a doubt, I would always wake up at 4:30 a.m. I would hear creaking down my stairs, footsteps, and I would hear these footsteps all the way to my door to my room. Then my door would slowly open. No one would ever be there, and after a minute or two, it would slowly close. After my entire childhood of living there, we finally moved. I was 17 and had not noticed anything creepy besides the door in years. One night, my mom's sister and I were all on her bed watching TV. It was June, and that day we had horrible thunderstorms. The storms got so bad that the power went out, and we all decided to go to sleep because it was getting late anyway. Then all 3 of us wake up at the exact same time. It's still dark, and it's very cold considering the fact that it was summer and the AC was off. Then all 3 of us gasped as we see at least a 7-foot-tall figure right in the bedroom doorway. Suddenly, I hear that laugh that I'd heard so many years ago. I knew who it was. Then the creature whispers something to us, something that is burnt into my memory. "I found you." My entire body was in shock. He found us. The black man. Then he vanished like he was never there. Nothing happened after that for years. That is, until I moved to Florida with my then boyfriend, now husband. My husband worked 3rd shift, so I always found myself not being able to sleep at night. I went out one night around 1 a.m. to smoke a joint. I have a very small house with a small front yard. I was planning on smoking fast and running inside. As I finished my joint and started walking, I noticed a long black arm with black claws stretching down from the roof, like something was going to grab my hair. It was inhuman. I told my husband, and he responded that he was worried about my health. That is, until he saw the black thing on top of the roof. That was the other day. Can anyone tell me why he's on my roof? I'm just wondering when he's going to try and come inside.